Welcome to another edition of Geopolitics and Empire. A quick reminder for everyone to support this Rebel transmission. That is very important. You can do that. The best free way to do that is leave a podcast review on Apple, Spotify, and so forth. Subscribe to all the channels, share, and I also do need your financial support. That's crucial. Best ways to do that are becoming a paid subscriber on the Substack, $5 a month, $50 annual or more. If you like, we do private weekly Zoom chats with members and stuff like that. You can buy me a coffee, send reinforcements through Donor Box, Subscribe Star, Locals, and so forth. You can purchase a consultation to chat with me, and do check out my affiliates like Legal Shield, Above Phone, and Wise Wolf Gold. We're actually going to be talking to the owner of Wise Wolf Gold, who's joining us now, Tony Arterburn, former U.S. Army Paratrooper, owner of Wise Wolf Gold, host of radio programs and Arterburn Radio Transmission and so forth. Welcome to the podcast, Tony.
Well, it's great to be here. I really appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah, I like your work. I've been following your stuff for a while. Geopolitics and Empire is now affiliate of Wise Wolf Gold. I see some listeners have already made a purchase. I saw you at Acapulco a couple months back in Acapulco. You gave a great speech. We didn't get to actually meet there, unfortunately, but if you could tell us just real quick a bit about yourself, your background, your war experience, and then the stuff you got going on right now.
Well, sure. I'm a veteran of 3 foreign wars. I was a U.S. Army paratrooper and military policeman in another lifetime. That's been 20 years since I got out of the military. And I come from a background, a family of entrepreneurs. My dad was just really like next level. They don't even make people like that anymore, I don't think. But he built a small empire for himself. I watched him do it growing up. And it was really interesting to watch. He chartered a bank in his 20s and built it from the ground up. He owned convenience stores and a fuel business in North Texas. And I really got to learn a lot. I got to see the struggles that he went through. You can talk about the breakup of Texas banking that happened in the late 80s. So I got a taste a little bit of conspiracy. Really he was influential in showing me what was going on with the government in the mid 90s prior to Oklahoma City. We went to a lot of talks. There was a groundswell. It was a really different time in America. There was a lot of grassroots stuff going on prior to Oklahoma City, and you can get into the conspiracy of that and why that I believe was an inside job to keep people from banding together and standing up for the Constitution. And I think we're in trouble because of that. Again, the cognitive dissonance that happened afterwards, where our politics are pretty much in the garbage. But I joined the military at 19. I'd always wanted to serve. And again, you got to see how things are done up close. So I've got my background is as a soldier, but I'm very much anti-war now. I was, teetering on that at the end of my service. And I got, my last tour was in Iraq, which was the class project of the neocons, and I got to see. But by the way, I opposed that before I went into it. It's like I knew that it was a bad idea. I just got back from my unit was the first Army company on the ground in Afghanistan and Kandahar after 9/11. I have some interesting stories about that. As 22-year-old post 9/11, kind of tip of the spear, being there first. When you're in a country first, when it's invaded, it's really interesting because the history is written by the victors, but you really get to see how things really were before the narrative covers it up. There's a machine of propaganda that comes in behind you, and I just got to see these things early on. So years later, I through my experience in the military and just being interested in business, I tried different things, but I really fell in love with precious metals and coins, and it really had to do with the history of money. I'm fascinated with that, and so I think what I do now is kind of fits me like a glove. I broadcast about history, about current events. It's kind of like you, geopolitics. This is my wheelhouse. This is so much fun. We get to kind of just talk about what I think about most of the time, and I get to help people. Because I think we're going in this is a transformational time where people are and then the vast majority of human beings on planet Earth are going to get caught flat-footed in a revaluation of all value. The philosopher Nietzsche talked about the transvaluation of all values. Well, we're going to have that in commodities, not just sociological. So this is what, again, we're going to probably get into some crazy stuff, but we're in unprecedented times. You're seeing de-dollarization worldwide. That is going to be the consequences of that. I don't even think anybody really has truly unraveled and come to terms and calculated what that's going to mean for the United States. But definitely we are seeing a shift globally, historically, geopolitically. And so I'm just glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, like I said, you've got so much experience and knowledge, and I thought I'd start to get your thoughts on the state of things in America, what I like to call the United Soviet States of America. I've been calling it that for 20 years, and for different reasons, I just ended up permanently expatriating from the U.S. I've got a couple extra citizenships now, and I'm down here in Mexico, and all of that in the end might not even matter if we become a North American Union. But just your sort of pulse on what's happening in America. It seems like there's attempts to balkanize the U.S. from many vantage points. The migration stuff, we're seeing all these like cyber polygon type blackout events, the weaponization of lawfare against Trump, and us citizens talk of a second civil war. We had the former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter, who I've had on the podcast here. He had his U.S. passport confiscated from him this week for attempting to travel to Russia. That's why it's good to have 2 or 3 passports like I do, where they can take my American passport and I'm like, well, I'll just continue on with my Mexican or Croatian passport. But what's sort of your pulse in the state of America today?
Well, it's not good. The prognosis is in, and I would say, just like John Dean told Nixon in the 70s, there's a cancer on the presidency and it's growing. There's a cancer on the United States of America. It's globalism, satanic New World Orderism, whatever you want to call it. But, the calls are coming from inside the house. I don't think a lot of people, especially in if you're on level 1 and you're listening to right-wing talk radio, it's all about exterior enemies, and it's always a kind of a game, who threatens, is it the axis of evil? Is it Iran? Is it North Korea? Is it Russia? It's Iraq and all these things, and then you realize as you get older and you just dig further and further, it's like, wait a minute. This is an inside job. And you can see America will be the only country, the great empire that was, every empire, every great nation has a rise, an apex, and then a decline. We all know that. It's just history 101. Nothing lasts forever. But I think America will be shown, if hopefully there is a future. I hope that there is, that it will be the first country that was brought down artificially. The Soviet Union was an artificial nation, but it wasn't brought down artificially. It just, by the weight of its own, failures and broken ideologies, it collapsed on itself and broke into 16 pieces. But I do think that, if you look at, you just go back to 1971, very crucial year for the United States. A lot of things were exposed at that time that, modern historians don't talk about, but we took the silver out of our coinage starting in 1965. And I think the rest of the world started to take notice of that because, if history is your guide, then when the empire starts to debase its currency, it's on its way out. And, we had a gold standard. Gold was $35 an ounce. We'd started that in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference. And I think what happened was a lot of countries said, wait a minute, you guys are doing this great society on the Mekong, as LBJ said, a guns and butter, writing all these checks. And, even President de Gaulle of France, he sent a warship over to pick up his gold in the late 60s. So they were going to the gold window. And President Nixon closed the gold window on August 15th, 1971. He interrupted an episode of Bonanza, which ironically is a show about people going out west to find gold. He interrupted that and closed the gold window. And that 1971, but it was also the year that Klaus Schwab founded the World Economic Forum. 1972, we opened China, which was a huge move. Geopolitically, monolithic communism kind of was broken up. 1973, we get the Trilateral Commission, Zygmunt Brzezinski and others, the Rockefellers. 1974, the United States runs its last trade surplus. That's what built America, you know? There's this famous picture. I mean, when I first went into radio, it has a picture of Detroit on one side and Hiroshima on the other for 1945. And then it shows 2011 or 12, same place, but it looks like Detroit was bombed, you know? So it said who won the war, you know, because you fast forward all these years and Detroit was a burnout, you know, wasteland. And here's Hiroshima. It's actually a buzzing metropolis. Everything's great. So these were all policies that I think if you just stack them on top of each other and you see that we've lost all fiscal sanity in the United States. Nobody talks about balancing the budget anymore. When I was a kid, you know, you had the contract with America and Newt Gingrich, and for all its faults, at least they were talking about having a budget. And there was a time when, if you can believe it, ladies and gentlemen, they had a surplus in this country. It was crazy. There was this weird time in the 90s when we actually had effort towards balancing a budget. Now that's all off the table. You don't even hear it anymore. It took us 200 years to go $1 trillion in debt. I mean, we weren't even $1 trillion in debt when I was born, and now we go $1 trillion in debt every 90 days. It takes $1 trillion over a year just to service the interest on the debt, folks. So again, the United States, if you look at whether it's the border issue, whether it's Biden leaving, you know, billions worth of equipment and cash and weaponry and all this stuff in Afghanistan, and then like just abandoning people that we had promised we would protect. By the way, I wanted to get out of Afghanistan, but there's a way to do it, right? You don't do it like that, right? You got to do it from a position of strength, and we didn't. So these are all setups for our allies starting to abandon us. The Biden administration is accelerating, you know, the decline. By the way, I'm not a partisan because the Trump administration did this too in their own way. But they definitely just put the Biden administration put the hammer down. I mean, they just said, hey, we're going to kill the petrodollar. I was talking earlier today on another show that we were talking about Bernstein, the guy that advises Biden. He can't even explain how value is created, like how currency is created. Like, again, this is his economic advisor. And he also argues, this Bernstein character argues that we should lose the world's reserve currency status as the dollar. Hey, that's the only reason we're still functioning. Like that there isn't an implosion of our economy is because the rest of the world, at least 40-something%, uses the dollar still. I mean, that's a huge drop from where we were at 75% in 2001. But there's just a lot of things that are accelerating. And I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but if you are paying attention and you want to try to protect yourself, start looking at these trends. There's trends that you and I can't do anything about. So, like, we can't stop de-dollarization. And I think our politics in this country, in the United States of America, has to play itself out. I'm optimistic that people are starting to come online and realize some stuff. Man, the mind control in the PSYOP is strong. The White House, what was it, 2 years ago, put out a memorandum asking different branches or different parts of the executive branch to report back and tell them what PSYOPs they were running, because no one could figure out which one was which, because they're just PSYOPs, so many PSYOPs going on that they wanted to figure out what was real. So that's the world we live in. And it's definitely the Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. I think we're seeing that come to fruition.
Yeah, and any thoughts I had on Dr. Paul Cook-Roberts earlier this week, who thinks that they might assassinate Trump, and even if Trump is going along with some of this stuff, I could see them even taking him out just for different PSYOP purposes or demoralization purposes. Do you think that, it seems like the regime is pushing this idea of a second civil war? I don't really see Americans. It's hard to imagine that happening. But any other thoughts on what this collapse sort of process might look like in the U.S.?
Well, I definitely think they are pushing division in one way or the other. It won't look like a North-South Civil War 1861. It won't look like that. That's not the kind of country we have anymore. The demographics are all skewed. Everything's mixed. I mean, you look at even the blue states are surrounded by red counties. It's just the cities that push it into what you would consider a blue state. So I think this is really an ideas based battlefield, and people are voting with their feet. They're going to different places. They're leaving. These states that are California, Illinois. People are fleeing. So they're voting with their feet. But again, it's more of I think Pat Buchanan called it a secession of the heart. It's like we're dividing from our neighbor based off of these political, sociological lines, ideological lines, religious lines. They definitely want you distracted with that while they rob you, because that's the thing. It's like your enemy's not the Democrats, and if your enemy's not the Republicans, it's the controllers of that duopoly. It's like I say on my show. It's the people versus the plutocrats, which is basically 99.9% of us versus this little tiny minute group of psychopaths that have generational wealth and control of a printing press. And they're farming it. We're being farmed. I mean, that's generally what's happening. So, balkanization definitely possible. I remember when I ran for Congress 11 years ago or 10 years ago, I was against the Texas nationalist movement because one of my heroes was Sam Houston, who was, basically the George Washington of Texas, if you will. He won the Battle of San Jacinto. I named my son after him, but he was a Union man, so was Andrew Jackson. And so I've served with people that were from New York and Massachusetts and California and Ohio. And I love my country. But at this time, I think really that's one of the only ways that freedom has a chance of surviving is if even if it's just a nullification and you just, these sheriffs or local, governments are saying, hey, we don't welcome your woke rainbow flag agenda, whatever this is, coming into our county. And, which is a Second Amendment safe zone. We have a sanctuary city for the Bill of Rights. That could be a future. That could be more what you're thinking about when you're talking about secession. Is it just like nullification? So I'm for people figuring that out. Whatever promotes freedom. I mean, Thomas Jefferson, I see in the background, you got a Thomas Jefferson poster. He really believed that the major cities, were just antithetical to freedom and liberty, and the only way that a true republic could exist would be in small states. So I think as the United States has bitten the bitter fruit of empire in the late 19th century, we've really paid a price for that. The Spanish-American War and then the adoption of the Federal Reserve, the two world wars, and we just further and further drift away from what we were supposed to be, which is a republic from sea to shining sea. And whether it's I call it weapons of mass immigration, whether it's a demographic bomb, and that's what they're doing with the southern border. And it's also a psyop to make you think, well, gosh, we can't even have a border. Like, are we a country? Like it's this pitiful giant that has, nuclear weapons and satellites and submarines, but we can't put up wire. It's like, it just makes it look, it's so incongruent. And I think that's probably the point. But we still got some of the greatest people on earth live in America. Some of that I love in my country. The thing is, when I talk about the American empire, I'm thinking of Dick Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz, Donald Rumsfeld. I'm thinking of psychopaths, military-industrial complex lackeys, people that have nothing. Again, what was it in the 90s? You had the Secretary of State before Madeleine Albright was Strobe Talbot, and he said the nation state was irrelevant. You're the Secretary of State. I often think about that. I bring that up on shows, but that's where we are. So it's unprecedented time, crazy time. I think there's opportunity in it, though. If I could shine a silver lining in that, I think it's a great time to really refocus your efforts. Like maybe look into becoming an entrepreneur. What could you bring to the marketplace, and what kind of services? I think it's going to be a lot of challenges, but yeah, the America that I grew up in, I don't know where it is. I'm not into politics. I'm not a partisan. If you want to I used to really study politics. But now I don't think there's any strategy in there, so that's a long way of saying, I think that we're in for a rude awakening, good things on the horizon too, but definitely don't have normalcy bias going into this chaos.
Yeah, I also have. It seems a lot of us are coming to that similar conclusion when it comes to politics. We had the voting here in Mexico over the weekend. I just refused to vote because, like, they're all owned by BlackRock. That's the short version of it, and not much difference in the U.S. and just a few things you mentioned. It's they call it Pride Month, right? But in an Idaho bar, there was an article about this Idaho bar declaring heterosexual awesomeness month, and I'd rather go with that. And we just had Bilderberg wrap up in Spain, and Financial Times, Martin Wolf, fresh off the Bilderberg boat, pens a propaganda piece. Nationalism threatens the world order. I translate that to nationalism threatens the world government, which, as you mentioned, Strobe Talbot, total globalist. I actually subscribe, I think, to his think tank's newsletter, and they just, for me, it all comes down to world government. I maybe just ask you about that now, globalism, because I think all of these crises, they keep saying they're trying to construct the Tower of Babel, once again, the world government, and the pretext they're using multiple pretexts to do this. They say pandemic, right? We need a global solution for a global problem. Nuclear threat, right? Oppenheimer even wrote about, Einstein talked about creating a world government to deal with this global threat of nuclear. Climate, global problem. We need. I just read Tony Guterres, the UN Sec Gen, came out today. He literally said we're the problem. He literally came out and said, humanity, we are the problem. That's like Club of Rome 70, 50 years ago saying humanity is the cancer. I mean, these guys are a Malthusian death cult. And so what are your thoughts on this whole Great Reset globalist project to construct this world government?
It was interesting you mentioned Einstein. I remember a quote that he had that said that nationalism was the measles of mankind. And I thought about that. I meditated on it. I said, I think you're right, because it's shown that measles is not usually lethal, and it will help you ward off cancer, which cancer is globalism. So I think he's probably right. And the measles of mankind, though, kind of the best of the worst is having nationalism, because nationalism and sovereignty, it's like if you read James Perloff's book, Truth is a Lonely Warrior, he talks about world government and a lot of these types that will get sucked into the Council on Foreign Relations, even like the lower level people, be like, well, we're just working towards world government because we want world peace. Well, what happens if a Saddam Hussein comes to the top of the world government? I mean, have you thought about that? There's nowhere to run, right? There's no borders anymore. There's no safe havens anymore. I mean, even biblically, they talk about, God talks about the nations, nation, tongue, and tribe. It's not for us to create some, I think world government, it looks good on paper, perhaps, if if you don't have much schooling, if you didn't really read history, it looks like it might work. But the elites take advantage of that. I think, through my study, I really think that they're going against the tide of history. I don't think history is going in centralization. I think history is moving away from centralization. I think that we've been moving away from centralization since the Protestant Reformation. It's 500 years ago. And then you go look at the, 250 years later, you have the American Revolution, you have the Industrial Revolution. I think that there's more and more push to move in a decentralized way. I think again, this is optimistic, but I think that's where people would like to go. Look at Bitcoin. Look at just the phenomenon of Bitcoin, what it means to humanity. Look at the way that we've set up markets, and it's how easy it is. I think of how many different corporations there are. People are able to start companies. There's decentralization, I think, is in the bloodstream, right? It's in the mass psyche. But the elites hate that, and they want to try to again, it's consolidation, 15-minute cities. Everything's convenient. There's one pharmacy, one store. Well, you know what that is? That's monopoly, folks. There's one thing, and they hate you. Like, they hate people, get in your pod, eat the bugs. And that is, if we allow you to survive, they want to throw you in Malthusian. Absolutely. Thomas Malthus, 19th century, famine, pestilence, and war. That's their favorite thing. But again, they're going against history. I think you mentioned the USSR, and like the Soviet Union was going against history. Communism goes against human nature. I mean, so they're pushing, and it's not attractive. I mean, the World Economics Forum. I mean, you go back, look at the commercial they ran in 2016. I used to play this on my show long before the scamdemic, and like this is my radio show in San Antonio. People didn't know what I was talking about. I was talking about the Great Reset. And I said, just listen to this guy. I was like, imagine a world where the United States is not the lone superpower. Imagine, and they're doing basically like a John Lennon, imagine where you own nothing and you'd be happy. And it's just, what are you selling? You're selling like pod people stuff. Nobody, that's not a cool dream. Like the American dream was at least something you could sell. You go back to, was it Warren G. Harding was a chicken in every pod, a car in every garage, all that kind of stuff. Well, that's something to sell. What are you selling? Cricket powder, and poverty. It's not a good sell. And now they got climate change and all this other nonsense. It's a complete psyop. Again, when I was a kid, they talk about cleaning stuff up. I mean, at least it was like, oh, we got to get the trash out of the ocean, or the cleaner air and water. Now it's like this ethereal thing. It's like, it's not even about any of that. No, they don't even plant trees anymore. So they have no vision. They just got the printing press. And that's it. They got the printing press, which allows them to run the military industrial complex, which allows them to scare the hell out of everybody. And they are dangerous. But I just think decentralized those of us who are talking about ideas and trying to help people, and I want humanity to survive. I want us to get better. The elites, they're just one thing after another, one example after the other. They hate us. And those who rule over us don't like us, and it's true here in America.
Your thoughts on the economy? Everyone I talk to, economic experts on the podcast, and we can all sort of see it, and it's a global phenomenon, right? In this globalized world where housing is just out of reach for everyone now. I travel sometimes. Like I said, I'm a citizen of different countries, but in the U.S., it's for the people that did the right thing, they went to school, they're working a full-time job, their spouses are working a full-time job. They tell me they can't even afford a house here in Mexico. Prices are shooting up. In Europe as well. And so, housing prices are becoming unattainable. And I think that's by design as well, by the BlackRocks of the world. I've read articles on that where they sort of game that, and then the middle class is being wiped out. People talk about this feudalism. So, whatever's going on, it just seems like we are, as you alluded to earlier, it's going to be a hard road ahead. There's going to be pain. There's going to be opportunity, as you say. But just what's your sort of take on the state of the global the economic situation? And it seems like things are collapsing worse in the West. And then, people often talk about when that happens, they take us to war, sort of to wipe the ledger, to restart the ledger.
Well, yeah, Gerald Celente, when all else fails, they take you to war. Trends Journal. I think he's absolutely right on that. And that's how they will cover up their sins. And their failures is just basically offer you up as a sacrifice. That's why I think it's going to be a very difficult road ahead, especially for those of us who are like onto this. Like, hey, this is, whether it's Ukraine or whether it's Taiwan or whatever, or Israel. These are all things that have nothing to do with us or our. I'm talking about the West. I'm talking about the United States of America, especially. So it is. I think these are dangerous times. The economy. Like you said, people being priced out of the middle class. I like that neo-feudalism. That's exactly right. There's like, we're the new serfs. The landed gentry and I've been making that analysis for years. Like this is the elites, and the oligarchs is basically, you can farm the land because we're farming you. I think though, as more and more people understand how this is rigged against us, I think there'll be maybe economic safe zones, like I said, like sanctuary states to have, the way they'll be rich, like Texas and other states are setting up bullion depositories, state run, making gold and silver legal tender. This is great for decentralization. There's also states, I think Oklahoma just passed a massive cryptocurrency deregulation bill, which I think is it's wonderful news for those of us who want freedom. So The thing is, if you really look back, you look at it across the board, it's it's a challenge. It's probably multi-generational. I mean, as far as humanity is concerned, this is some of the most evil we've ever seen. And they have the technology now to really not to lock us down, like with central bank digital currency and other things. But I think we have a challenge, and I think we got the right people to rise to meet that challenge. I think that's why we're here. It's more of a spiritual take on it. BlackRock, you're absolutely right, buying up the homes. I mean, there's a reason for that. You know, if you're aware of that, then you can make better decisions on what you want to do, like buying a house, like maybe where you buy it. I'd look. There's probably going to be some buying opportunities for real estate in the next 24 to 36 months. I would assume when we have a further consolidated downturn, I'd look to after the election, because whoever, and I would assume it'll be Trump be elected, because they want to. I think that the elites would prefer to dump the blame, or at least the perception of the blame, for an economic collapse in the lap of America first, and say, look what you did, look what nationalism did. And even though we can have a conversation about what Trump is, whether or not his policies or the personnel were nationalist, but if he definitely, it'll be the blame. So that's the way I would war game it out now, is that, you have the elites, and it's a kind of a multi-pronged thing. On one hand, they've got the Bitcoin ETFs, which is bizarre. You got Larry Fink championing Bitcoin. I mean, who would have thought that, 36 months ago? That's bizarre. They still hate gold, which is another tell. Like BlackRock and Larry Fink, like, why don't you guys are the developing world? You're hurting yourselves by buying gold. You're not helping anybody. So there's some kind of message there. But yeah, the real estate thing, that's a huge tell. They literally want you to own nothing. I don't think they care so much about the be happy part. They'd like to have, I think that's the whole point of the World Economic Forum shift away from actual capitalism or the remnants of it to some weird Soviet stuff. Like you said, I think, Bill Cooper would call it a one world totalitarian socialist government. That's their vision. Whether or not they get there, I think that's up to us.
Yeah, I'm reading old books now. H.G. Wells and his disciples, like Warren Wagar, and all of them across the board, going back a century, they specifically talk about, we just mentioned, they want a democratic socialist or socialist world state or government, totalitarian, they openly say. Just your thought on the specter of a third world war. It just seems like they're lining things up that way. There's calls for conscription in my country of Croatia, Serbia, UK now. And I think we just today, the first U.S. Ukraine just attacked within Russia, right, with using Western weapons. And it just seems like Washington, London, Brussels, they're psychopaths. And I think they think nothing of killing millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people, and they can always build back better after that. They wipe the slate clean. They can reform the UN. They can create a new world government organization, and in the rubble of the destruction of everything, they can build these new digital ID systems, CBDC systems. So it just seems like the nations are gearing for war again. Do you have any thought on in this aspect, the military, geopolitical, where things are headed?
Well, unfortunately, I think you're right. And that seems to be, that's their wheelhouse. It's the first place. I think they would love it if we were just constantly at war. It's hard for them to, I think it has to be, they do it in spurts. And then of course we're coming up on 80 years after the end of World War II. So it's just that fourth turning, that generational turning, where you have another culmination. The Romans called it a secularum. It's about every 80 to 100 years, you have a massive change in society. So I think they time it for those kind of things as well. For the change, you're so right on the change, though. That would allow them to do a lot. Like you could get people like me who you could say, well, here's a dissident. He's for the terrorists, or whatever. He's for the, he's speaking out against this war, so he's part of the enemy. It's the Alien and Sedition Act or whatever. It's like, it's just go after him. And I think that's the way they can consolidate power. And it's bizarre. I mean, you look at Taiwan. This is something I've talked about on my show. I said, is anybody paying attention to the fact that we, when I was born, before I was born, like we signed over that we signed in a memorandum with Zbigniew Brzezinski and Jimmy Carter on January 1st, 1979. We cut diplomatic ties with Taipei. We said we agree with the one China policy. That's from the White House. So, again, you fast forward all these years and now we're giving them aid. The first person that Trump talked to after he was elected, when he was the president-elect, was the president of Taiwan, and the media went berserk, and they said, look, you can't talk to him. You can't talk to that person. This is wrong. It hurts our relations with China. Now we're just building it up. It's almost like we just went this far, and now we just want to go ahead and go to war. Like the same thing with Ukraine, what happened on October 7th with Israel and Hamas, so bizarre stuff. It's like we're setting the chessboard up, drawing the lines. Iran's driven into the sector of Russia and China, and we're taking our allies over here, and and in the Middle East, we've got carving out Saudi Arabia, Middle East, and Israel. The war clouds are on the horizon. I hope I'm wrong, because this is the cataclysm. And it will be for what? What? For human liberty? What are we going to war for? It's just, again, is it just to save the banksters? Is it just to cover up their crimes and say, well, we didn't go broke, that was, and now they can't use the virus. Maybe they use, it's the Russians did it. The Russians bankrupted us. And, now we can use this. If you just give us your biometrics and, give us a Hail Satan, we'll send you $50 in cryptocurrency or whatever, or central bank digital currency. I definitely don't write that off. And I think we've been, they cried wolf so many times, and I try not to do this on my show or anything else. I'm just saying, hey, this is weird. Look at this. Is this a trend? But people kind of expect, like, what, since we're not in World War III, but we kind of are, perhaps this war doesn't look like other wars, but again, I'm not sure. You are absolutely right. Psychopaths, like the t-shirt man out of Ukraine. Sun Tzu, what is that famous quote from Sun Tzu? Like, an evil man will reign over the ashes of his country. Like he will reign. These people had no inroads for peace, no nothing. No summits. That's the difference. I think that's the dog that didn't bark, if you will, because you look at the past, there was always Reagan had Reykjavik, in the late 80s with Gorbachev and the Soviets, Nixon had Brezhnev and the SALT Treaty, the Strategic Arms Limitation Agreement. Kennedy had the upper atmospheric nuclear test ban, with Khrushchev. We're not even meeting with people, and there's no summits anymore. They literally just don't do it. So I don't know. I think you're right about the psychopath part. I think there's some tells out there. I think people need to, realize that that's how they shuffle things around. That's how they cover stuff up. As Donald Rumsfeld couldn't track $2.3 trillion on September 10th, 2001, and that accounting office for whatever hit the Pentagon was where they were counting it. Okay. So that's where we are.
Yeah. And, the war wouldn't be for democracy when you've got Washington and the EU running undemocratic regime change operations and coup d'etats and attempting to assassinate politicians like Robert Fico of Slovakia, who just before we joined, he's back. He just published today 15-minute video. He's alive and well. Or EU politicians threatening to assassinate Georgian politicians if they don't become vassals of the EU. So war will definitely not be for democracy and liberty. It'll be for the oligarchy. And by the way, I met Gorbachev some years ago. I got to shake hands with the last president of the Soviet Union in Moscow. He was actually invited to my graduation in Geneva, but he couldn't make it. And just one more thought on the whole technocracy, CBDC stuff. The digital ID. I had on Edwin Black, the Jewish historian whose work I love. He calls it the algorithm ghetto, right? The social credit system. And that's one of my biggest fears, because we're seeing in every single country now. Every single country, they're bringing in digital ID. Different countries are at different stages of this. But and then first they say it's voluntary, and then it's mandatory, and then you can in some of these countries you cannot function, you cannot carry out any public or private activity without having a smartphone, without having the digital ID, and then that links to your banking system. And then I have guests on. Sometimes it feels like we have so many problems with the technology. Our computers fail, internet fails, electricity fails. So it does seem like it's going to be an uphill struggle for them to roll out these systems. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's true. When you're in Mexico, can you do a CBDC in Mexico? Like, really? Like, really make it work? I mean, come on. I was just there in Acapulco, and come on. I mean, it would be hard to do it here. It'd be even harder in places like Mexico. So they have an uphill battle. Don't write them off, though. I mean, they're going to do it. I mean, this is hell or high water. They need this thing. It's, I think, again, it's a spiritual level of stuff that for control. It's what they serve. But yeah, the prospect of that is very little. But again, as far as being rolled out the way I think they want it to be rolled out, but it is the hill, as our friend Charlie Robinson said, it's the hill to die on. We can't let them get total control of the way that we buy and spend. Parallel systems are an absolute must, and that is being outside of the system, with crypto, with your own wallet, with your own keys. Gold and silver in the real world, in the third dimension, physical gold and silver, no counterparty risk. These are the ways that, again, they're going to implement it. The World Economic Forum was they put out a story 2-3 weeks ago, like, 98% of countries already have a blueprint for central bank digital currency. Of course they do, and it all leads back to the Bank of International Settlements in Basel, Switzerland, and it leads to the IMF with their Unicoin, all the stuff. It's one world. That's what they want to do. And they do it regionally first. But let's look at Nigeria. Total failure. They rolled out their central bank digital currency because a lot of the Nigerians were using Bitcoin in daily transactions. Guess what? It's a total flop. And now they're doing a gold-backed currency in Ethiopia. Same thing is great. People are taking part in it, and it's you can cash it out for gold. There's a lot of stuff happening. It's all happening at once too. Where you've got the one side, you got the darkness that's the total control grid, and then you got people that are decentralizing and coming up with great ideas. I think we got the better ideas. I think we got the smarter people. I think we got people with soul, and it's. Again, it's the establishment. It reminds me, we're talking about treaties and something that Pat Buchanan said. He was with Reagan at Reykjavik, and I used to read about this stuff in like geopolitics and stuff, and now I kind of tune out because I think so much of it's scripted and fake. And it might have been then, but at least it was interesting. And there was Reagan pounding the table over Star Wars and SDI and Gorbachev. Pushing back against that. But Buchanan said something that I thought was really interesting. He said, when I walked into the room, and it's like these old Soviet guys, these old Bolsheviks came in, and their bones creaked, and they just seemed old. And then here we were with Reagan, and he's sunny from California, and this actor, and he's just a cold warrior. And it just seemed like there was this dichotomy was so striking. I think that's just us, the people that are like making things happen and innovating. There's still that spirit out there. It's being crushed. I mean, we're up against some real psychopaths, and they're going to disrupt our lives with war and all these other things. But it's just up to us to overcome it. And I don't want to be too much of an alarmist on central bank digital currency, but you're absolutely right. It's harder to roll out in these other places, places like Mexico. It would be really tough. I mean, get everybody a device. I mean, come on, think of the learning curve there. And the same thing in the US. I mean, I run a gold and silver shop. I mean, come on, I know how people like to cash out stuff and buy things. So it's definitely their wet dream. It's what they want, and that's what we're up against. And again, if we create the parallel systems and we learn about how to be our own bank, I think we're going to be way ahead, leaps and bounds of from the average citizen.
You mentioned Mexico, where all the politicians have to be narco approved. I mean, just dozens and dozens this year of political candidates just taken out by the narcos. Hundreds have resigned because they don't want to be taken out. And interesting, you touched on that cultural nuance, because I've lived in the former Soviet Union, in Kazakhstan, and been to Russia. Great people, right? All over the world, people are great, but they have different nuances and cultures, and it's still like that, where they're more sort of very reserved. They don't smile as easy out in the East, and in the West, we're just like, go get them. And so it's just interesting that difference. And I do want to ask you about the alternative media. I mean, you work in it, and we're seeing a lot of strange things now. People talk about these how the alternative media is being infiltrated. And I have guests on, I've had some guests on where what you mentioned earlier, and this sort of bugs me, where they tout their alternative media, they talk about the COVID stuff and all these other things, but then they continue to push the anti-China line. I'm no fan of CCP or China, but it's like what you said, it's not China, it's not Russia, it's the globalist structure within Washington and Wall Street and all that. And so I just kind of find it odd now how these thoughts are being steered within alternative media, where they're saying China, China, China. And it's like, no. So they're pushing, there's all these agendas now in alternative media. What are your thoughts on the space here?
It's an interesting phenomenon, because you got to try to figure out what is the source of this, because it's like you get, it's kind of like the QAnon movement that happened under during the 2017 and onwards. Very bizarre, where they take, real research, real things, and then they throw in something insane. It's like, hey, look into the Federal Reserve conspiracy. Oh yeah. Look at this, look at, the military industrial complex. Look at the JFK assassination. Look at 9/11. Oh, also JFK Jr. is alive. You're like, what? And he's going to be president. So and then you destroy all the good stuff. So it's the same thing with, in this, my good friend Billy Ray Valentine, the Infinite Fringe podcast, is, he's a throwback to the way alternative media really used to be. It was about the left-right paradigm. We're just about, uncovering the truth. There was a shift in alternative media with Trump in 2015, 2016, and people started taking sides. They joined kind of the right wing, if you want to put it that way. And I'm an old, I ran as a conservative, I'm a Pat Buchanan, Ron Paul guy. I did that back in 2013, 2014, ran for Congress in North Texas. And I've come a long way since then. Just you get more research, I uncover more things, and I change my opinion. Not crazy amount of changes of opinion, but enough to where I'm now, I'm certainly in alternative media. I'm a proud conspiracy analyst. So I think that there's been a bend in the river, what if you will, and with alternative media. And there was about 2015, 2016. And it's just the way to be really profitable in alternative media most of the time. And I'm so privileged, because I'm in this group of people in alternative media, which Charlie Robinson and Sam Tripoli with tinfoil hat. If I can, I'm not even saying I'm just saying these are my friends. I wouldn't compare myself to them, but people like David Knight, formerly of InfoWars, and I used to be a guest host on InfoWars. I'd fill in for Owen Schroyer and David when down in Austin, and so I'm in a great group of people. I know all the people that I broadcast with, Don Jeffries and Billy Ray Valentine. I know them, and I know that they're just from the heart. Everything they're saying is, I know they're genuine, real human beings. There's something weird with the alternative. You're so right about that. It's like, hey, they talk about, it's like Rand Paul in Congress talking about gain of function all the time, instead of talking about the lockdowns or what happened with warp speed, or, it's like it's like, this is important, but you're putting this over here, and it's like it's a level 2, and we need to be talking about level 10 stuff, and it's like it's a very much a misdirection, like putting Fauci out front as the blame. It's like, well, yeah, he's to blame, but it's the entire policy and all these people that are around it, and it's not just gain of function. So, and tying it all back to China, it's like there's something weird with that, and it's almost like we're getting primed to blame somebody else. So that's the way you would do it if you wanted to make sure that the dissent, because alternative media and what you would consider in a Gary Allen-esque, Gary Allen wrote None Dare Call It Conspiracy. And Gary said, basically the farther right you go, the less government. So it's not totalitarian. On a real scale of left to right, the farther right you go is anarchy, right? And so on a Gary Allen-esque way, if you wanted to capture those people, you'd have to convince them that the enemy is not internal, it's external. And so maybe that's the goal of that. Again, I don't pretend to know the hearts of the people that are pushing this stuff, but if you stop for 5, and I promise you that probably that China thing is also going to come with a lot of pro-Trump MAGA-ish stuff, right? It comes with MAGA, it comes with Trump, it comes with Q, or there's a mix of it, or there's a great awakening, or whatever that is. And you just need to be very careful at what, and this is, I've been in media a long time. I'm not an expert. I've hopefully paid most of my dues. I still pay them every day, but I started out in traditional talk radio. I still do 1 hour a week on a mainline talk radio station out of San Antonio, Texas, and they still let me do that. I don't sound like any of the other hosts. So hopefully, and I get people that want to do business with me because of that. They're like, well, I've never heard anything like that. And that's good. So we definitely need to be, well, keep your head on a swivel, as the military would say, stay frosty, when you're looking at all this stuff.
Yeah, and just one other thing that bugs me that's seeping in as well to alt media is all this occult theosophy stuff. And David Knight, I'm a huge fan of his. I'd love to have him on the podcast someday. He's been going hard on some of the Alex Jones Infowars stuff that's really funky that's going on right now. And I've interviewed Don Jeffries as well on my old TNT radio program. He's really good. And so thoughts on how to survive. You mentioned Bitcoin. I got a Libertad here, if people can see.
Nice.
The Mexican. I like to buy locally. So when I was in Kazakhstan, I bought gold and silver from the Kazakh Central Bank here in Mexico. And then for listeners in the U.S., can get from Wise Wolf gold using my affiliate link. But your thoughts on how to survive the road ahead. It seems like a lot of common sense stuff. Back in 2020, I think it was, I interviewed a former Australian Special Forces, Ricardo Bossi of Australia One Party, and he that's stuck in my head. Teddy Roosevelt quote that he said, "Do what you can with what you got where you're at." That's simple. Don't go crazy. Have a balance. Make some preparations. Enjoy life. Stop. Try not to think about these things every single day. Get some gold and silver, physical. Maybe have it stored in another portion stored elsewhere. Some Bitcoin. Farmland, right? Have a well with water, fruits, vegetables, some animals, and a good network, I think, of people. Your thoughts sort of on surviving whatever's coming.
I love that quote, because that's just about doing your best. If you're doing your best, that's all you can do. You can't move heaven and earth. You can't change. This is the Serenity Prayer. God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change and to change the things that I can. The courage to know the difference and the wisdom. So I really feel like if people will take a step back and, get out a legal pad, write down all the things and assets that you have, what would you do in a situation with loss of power? Do you have battery backups? Do you have flashlights? Do you have the ability to purify water? Like, these are things you can do for not a lot of money. I mean, especially if you're in the States, if you can, like where you live. I go back and forth between Southern Missouri and North Texas. I got a little place in North Texas, just off the border of Oklahoma, where I have one of my shops, and then I have my place here in the Ozarks. I love it. It's a 6-hour drive in between, and it's just God's country. There's no major cities. I'm going through Oklahoma and North Texas. I mean, right on the border. So it's great. So I'm very privileged, and I love what I do. I got a little bit of land in the Ozarks. I love my land. I was out listening last night to the owls, and the coyotes were coming in. It's just beautiful. So I'm very fortunate there. But even me, I'd be challenged if there was a shutdown. I mean, yeah, I would still have to grow things. You still got to hunt. You still have to purify your water. You got to do all this stuff. And then, how do you conduct commerce? So don't try to overthink it. Just what are your assets? What could you do? Do you have a bug out bag? Do you have a place where you can go? Major cities are tough, especially in the U.S. Like just being in them. I got out of, and Texas is great, but I wanted to kind of stay above. I was in San Antonio, and I wanted to be like above where that corridor of Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, and Houston. I wanted to be just a little bit up north where I was above it. So I would just say, look at where you are, have a plan, know how you can survive at least a week or two, through having a shortwave radio, find out what's going on. Solar is always good. But yeah, it's everybody's going to have different economic conditions. Like a lot of people just say, buy this and have, a year's worth of storable food. Well, who the hell, even like, it's hard for me to do that. Like I can't just throw around, thousands of dollars. It's crazy. So just do what you can with what you have where you are. I love that.
Yeah. And even with the storable food, that's my geography here where I am in Mexico with the weather, the heat, and then when the rains come, don't have a big house, and it's difficult to store it because of the conditions. The bugs come in, the ants. Every year we got to deal with the insects. It's just like it's different for different people. Any final thought, and then tell us all your links are in the description, but tell us where we can find your broadcasts. I think you have Free World FM and the Wise Wolf Gold and all of that.
Oh, well, again, thanks this has been a great talk, and thanks for having me on. It's anytime you want me to come back, if there's something that happens, hopefully it's just smooth. I'd love it for you and I just to be wrong about a lot of stuff, and maybe we're just a couple of nerds that got everything wrong. That'd be great, wouldn't it? So that's at 44, that's where I'm at in my life. Like, I really hope I'm wrong, but in case I'm not, then, again, this is the time, this kind of a eye of the hurricane, you can take some precautions and think about how you can become more self-sufficient. One of the ways you can do that is through learning about precious metals. And I have a show called the Wise Wolf Gold and Crypto Show. I'm going to be putting up some more episodes soon. I have a radio show called the Arterburn Radio Transmission. I do that once a week. You can find me at arterburn.news, and I'm working on that website as well. I keep saying that every show I do. I'm working on it, but I got to republish it and put new links up. But we also have a company called, it's a part of the company called Wolfpack, and you can go to wolfpack.gold, and of course use your affiliate link and put that in the show notes. But we have a monthly membership program for precious metals. It starts at $50 a month, and so if you think you can't afford precious metals, think again. So it starts at $50. It's metals delivered directly to your door if you're in the United States. And we ship those out like right after you bill. So it's a pretty swift process. We got almost 1,200 people all over the U.S. that are automatic, and it goes from 50 to 5,000. So it's a big variety of different packages and things you can do in there. And that we're working on taking crypto for payments on too, like direct payments. I certainly can do it for direct payments and things like that now. So got two locations, one in Branson, Missouri, one in Denison, Texas. And so that for precious metals, I think we're doing pretty good. Just being able to help people, and we got a different kind of program. We targeted different demographics, I think, than the big guys. It's just, I think it helps people, especially going into de-dollarization and loss of purchasing power. Like, check out silver, check out gold, learn how to own it. And we've definitely made that possible through Wolfpack.
Yeah, that's a unique program. And I was messaging with one of my past guests who's internationalized, I think a wealthy dude. And he was also saying the top things to do, get some gold, silver, thinks Bitcoin will be going up. I've got questions with Bitcoin. I've been thinking it was part of their plan, but if it's going to go up and help some of us out, hey, maybe why not take advantage of it? Well, Tony, thank you for joining us for the first time in Geopolitics and Empire, and hopefully we see you again at some point.
I hope so. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up for the free email list that goes out with each podcast and every weekend with a collection of news headlines. The newsletter and website are our last lines of defense. we're being censored and deplatformed. It's nearly impossible to find Geopolitics and Empire on the Google search engine. We've been blacklisted. YouTube frequently takes down our videos with strikes. Facebook restricts our page. Reddit and Twitter take down posts. And after the Associated Press mentioned Geopolitics and Empire in a 2021 article co-written with NATO, our Patreon account was terminated. Vimeo also terminated our Pro account. The best free way to help Geopolitics and Empire is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or elsewhere and subscribe to all of our media channels. You can find the video broadcast now on 5 platforms: Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, BitChute, and Brighteon. You can find the audio broadcast on the podcast ecosystem: SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, and so on. My current favorite social media channels are Twitter and Telegram, but you can also find us on Gab, MeWe, Minds, Float, VK, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Finally, Geopolitics and Empire is in dire need of funding to continue. You can leave a donation, purchase a consultation with the host, or become a member to receive additional benefits. We also produce a weekly broadcast called Dissident Thinker for members and Rockfin subscribers only. We will continue to fight the good fight come hell or high water. Thank you for listening.